thinking about enrolling in an online degree and you keep asking yourself, is this actually respected by employers? You're definitely not alone. This question comes up all the time, especially if you've been looking into schools like University of the People or you've seen the term WASC Accredited and aren't totally sure what that means. It can definitely feel confusing really quickly, and honestly, the stakes feel high because you're investing time, energy, and your future into this decision. So let's walk through it clearly. By the end of this, you'll understand what accreditation actually signals, why WASC matters specifically, and whether a WASC accredited online degree is something you can feel confident putting on your resume. At its core, accreditation is basically a quality signal. It's a way for an outside organization to verify that a school meets certain academic standards. That includes things like the rigor of the curriculum, the qualifications of the professors, and whether the institution is operating legitimately. Employers don't usually dig into the details of how accreditation works, but they do rely on it as a shortcut for trust. It tells them that your degree isn't coming from a diploma mill and that there's some baseline level of credibility behind it. Here's where things get more nuanced and where a lot of confusion comes in. Not all accreditation is viewed the same way, and that distinction can actually impact how your degree is perceived. In the US, there are two main types of accreditation, regional and national. Historically, regional accreditation has been considered the gold standard. These accrediting bodies are tied to specific geographic regions and tend to evaluate schools under more traditional academic standards. One of the most well-known and respected of these is the Western Association of Schools and Colleges, or WASC. This is the same accrediting body that oversees major universities, including well-established public and private institutions. On the other side, you have national accreditors like the Distance Education Accrediting Commission, which have historically been more common or for career-focused schools. These programs can absolutely be legitimate, but they haven't always carried the same weight in the eyes of employers or graduate programs. That's why you might hear people questioning whether a nationally accredited degree will count in the same way. This is exactly why the distinction matters so much right now. When a school transitions from DEAC accreditation to WASC accreditation, it's not just a technical change. It's a shift in how that degree is perceived in the broader ecosystem. WASC is widely recognized and trusted, and because it evaluates institutions under the same framework as traditional universities, it signals a higher level of academic alignment. For employers, this reduces uncertainty. They don't have to wonder whether your education meets a certain standard because the accreditation already answers that question for them. In a way, WASC acts as a kind of shorthand. It tells people this degree has been vetted in a way that's consistent with schools that you already trust. This is where using University of the People as an example becomes really helpful. For a long time, it was accredited by DEAC, and while that made it legitimate, it also led to hesitation. People would ask whether it was respected, whether employers would take it seriously, or whether it would hold them back. But with its move toward WASC accreditation, that perception starts to change in a meaningful way. Instead of being viewed as just a low-cost or alternative option, it begins to sit closer to the traditional higher education system in terms of credibility. That doesn't mean it suddenly carries the same prestige as an Ivy League school, but it does mean that it clears more of the invisible barriers that can exist during hiring or admissions processes. It becomes easier to explain, easier to validate, and less likely to raise concerns. Now, let's talk about what employers actually care about, because this is where people sometimes overthink things. Most employers are not sitting there analyzing accreditation types in depth. They're not comparing WASC versus DEAC line by line. What they're really looking for is whether you have a recognized degree, whether you've built relevant skills, and whether you can do the job. However, accreditation still plays an important role at the screening stage. If your degree comes from an institution that's properly accredited, especially by a well-recognized body like WASC, you're much more likely to pass that initial filter. If it's unaccredited or comes from a source that raises questions, that's where you might run into issues before you even get the chance to prove yourself. So the way to think about it is that accreditation helps you get in the door, but it's your skills and experience that ultimately get you hired. So, are WASC accredited online universities respected by employers? The honest answer is yes. Broadly speaking, they are. They carry significantly more credibility than nationally accredited or unaccredited programs, and they align much more closely with what employers already recognize and trust. But whether this path is right for you really depends on your goals. If you're someone who needs flexibility, wants a more affordable option, and is willing to take ownership of building your skills and experience alongside your degree, this can be a really strong choice. It's especially valuable if you care about having a credential that's credible without needing it to come from a prestigious or brand name institution. At the same time, it's important to be realistic about where this might not be the best fit. If your goal is to break into highly competitive or prestige-driven fields, or if you're aiming for environments where brand recognition plays a huge role, a more traditional or well-known university might give you an advantage there. The same goes if you're planning to transfer credits frequently or pursue certain graduate education programs that have very specific requirements. In those cases, it's worth doing that extra research to make sure your path aligns with your long-term plans. But for people, especially those looking for a flexible, credible, and practical way to earn a degree, a WASC accredited online program is something you can feel confident about. And in the case of schools like University of the People, it's no longer something that you have to justify or defend. It's something you can stand behind, knowing that it meets recognized standards and gives you a legitimate foundation to build on.